that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is an Energy Week special. This is the 297th edition of Energy Week, and we have a guest for this particular show. It's a special, and the guest is Nick Charyk, who you're seeing right there.
And, happy to be here.
Nick is going to tell us about the AllEarth Rail project that is going on in northern Vermont and hopefully throughout the state.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Well, I brought some slides to explain what I'm talking about, but my name's Nick. I work for AllEarth Renewables, which is a renewable energy company here in Vermont. I'm the public relations and communication manager, but the project I'm working on with most of my time right now that I'm very, very excited about for all sorts of reasons is this train project. And so AllEarth Rail is a division of AllEarth Renewables. And it came about, David...
Well, what does AllEarth Renewables do?
So we do a little bit of everything, which suits my personality well, because I don't get bored. But David Blittersdorf is the founder, and he's a lifelong Vermonter, grew up in Pittsford, Vermont, was one of the founders of Energy Systems, which was a company that really led the cutting edge of figuring out how to measure wind. And they became a leader in the US and the whole world in figuring out wind sighting and the instruments needed to figure out where viable locations were. And so he did that very successfully for a while. About a decade ago, founded a new company, AllEarth Renewables, that initially looked at small-scale wind, figured out or decided that that wasn't a viable approach for a number of reasons, and began manufacturing very quickly solar trackers, which you see all over Vermont. You see them all over the place, including my front yard.
They're like on poles, and they follow the sun.
Yeah, you can tell it's one of ours if it's in a different place when you saw it than it was earlier in the day.
How much do you gain over
significant, depending on the siting, but up to 45%.
45%. So you can gain almost half again by following the sun.
Yeah, and so I have one of our setups at our house, and it produces enough electricity. It averages out year round. When I add heat pumps in, I should be able to produce enough electricity.
So you're pretty close to being self-sufficient.
Which is an incredible feeling.
Absolutely.
Now we're early on in the experiment in my household, so time will tell, but that's really what AllEarth has been doing for the last decade, has been producing these trackers. So we're a manufacturing facility in Vermont. You see our products all over the country and all over Vermont, and they're those solar panels that move over the course of the day, and they have a wind sensor on them, so if the wind really kicks up, they'll flatten out so they don't blow away, and at the end of the day, they flatten back out.
Oh, is that so?
As well. So I try to beat them up in the morning, particularly this time of year. It's a little easier because they come up with the sunrise.
Too?
Exactly. So that's sort of the lifeblood of our business, and so we do the manufacturing in Vermont out of Williston.
So they're a little bit more expensive, but they pay themselves back.
That's been our experience,
Yeah.
And it's a niche that not a lot of other folks are doing. Two-phase trackers, which means they track left to right and up and down, and they're GPS connected, so they follow optimized with the sun all year long, so they're getting the best possible angle for productivity. We also do wind projects. We did the Georgia Mountain Wind Project up in Franklin County, bordering Chittenden County in Vermont. And then we're also working on a wind project right now, which is the last wind project still being developed in Vermont. It's up in Holland near the Canadian border, and it's called Derriere Wind. And it's a single turbine in a cornfield.
A single turbine?
That a dairy farmer wants, and he's going to live underneath it. And we're trying to figure out how to get that done.
How can he stand all that terrible noise?
Well, he must be out of his damn mind.
Tom and I went to Searsburg, and at Searsburg...
survived.
Yeah, we survived.
With
at
your
Searsburg,
wits
Tom had a decibel meter with him, and so we could read things. And one of the things that I kind of enjoyed was the fact that a fellow who was talking to us when we were under operating wind turbines was significantly louder than the wind turbines.
The cars going by on a highway are louder than the wind turbines, just their tires. And the trucks on the hill where they're using their Jake brakes, you're 5 miles away. And they're much louder than the turbines.
It's a real shame that as a state, with everything else that's going on and all the
Yeah.
evidence of the impending impacts of climate change and the current impacts, we've decided to take essentially wind off the table as one of our energy solutions. It's completely insane. It's something Vermonters don't understand.
There's a strong movement in Vermont opposing it. And
I
it's
think
based
there's
upon a will-o'-the-wisp, but it's
well,
there.
they've been successful at that
Yeah.
point in time. We don't
They
have an
have.
official policy, but in practicality,
Yeah.
there's no new wind being developed. And the
Yeah.
one project that we're working on is about as minimal as you can go. It's a single turbine, it's flat land, it's in a cornfield, and a farmer wants to live there. He wants to do it so his dairy farm can be sustainable for the next generation. We're trying to make that happen. We're in the midst of permitting. I wouldn't bet on my chances. Right
wind
now.
farms are, in the United States in general, very supportive of farmers. Very, and they make it possible for a lot of farmers to stay in business doing what they're doing.
Well, it's an extra crop.
Yes, it is. But we need to know about AllEarth
So that's
Rail.
what AllEarth does. AllEarth Rail specifically is a project that came about in earnest, began last summer. David Blittersdorf, the owner of AllEarth, has been thinking about transportation for a good while, thinking about it specifically in the context of climate change and emissions, and thinking about it in that we have to really fundamentally alter the way we move people around in the future. We need to electrify, we need to do other things, but we also need to start moving about more efficiently. And he got interested in rail because there was a point in this country where we were doing this very successfully and moving people around in mass transit. And so after inquiring around, he got connected with Charlie Moore, who's a guy who's been in the railroad business his whole life. I'm going to go to the next slide here. It's the two of them. It's my boss, David, in the short sleeves. I guess they're both short sleeves. Charlie is the slightly older gentleman in the gray shirt. Lifelong railroader. They began talking about railroads and climate change and got really interested in these rail cars that you can see in this picture here, which is a Bud car. Bud cars were produced in Philadelphia, a very cutting-edge technology in the 50s as we were really figuring out how to do passenger rail really successfully.
The thing that made this cutting edge is interesting, I think, is that Bud figured out how you could take stainless steel pieces of the skin of the car and weld them to a standard steel structural components without heating the stainless steel enough to destroy the alloy. And the business of heating stainless steel is a serious problem because if you heat it, you can compromise the alloy to the point where it's no longer
not stainless.
stainless. Yeah. And it will rust at that point. So these cars have a longevity that is really impressive.
Well, what did you say, 1950s they started making them? And they're still available today.
So that's the story of this. So we have a dozen of these cars in Vermont here now. And this is what they look like. So they were bought from Dallas last summer. And this was the public transit system in Dallas for years. And it was so successful that they refurbished the cars in the late 90s, really brought them up to looking and feeling like and operating like new again.
So these are your cars?
These are the exact ones.
Yeah.
And Dallas, Texas put them up for auction last summer, and the country of Canada bid on them, and we won, and we happened to win. And so they showed up in Vermont, and there's a dozen
magically.
of them. And now we're trying to figure out how do we get these actually moving in Vermont. And so we've spent some time going over them, inspecting them, making sure they're good to start rolling.
You know,
and we're pretty much there.
Nick, this reminds me a little bit of a guy who was a railroad buff who owned a diesel locomotive.
Yes.
And he would go on vacation by hopping into his diesel locomotive and going out on the tracks. Now, of course, you can't do this without arranging it all in advance. But, you know, he'd be going down the tracks and get the same kinds of signals to go ahead that every train did.
Every other train did.
This is something that people don't really understand, is that those tracks are privately owned for the most part, but they're highly regulated. But there is access to them.
Yes.
That access is available. So you can build.
It's a matter of scheduling, right?
Yeah, it's a matter of scheduling. You can organize a new rail company, which is what David Blittersdorf is doing, without really getting in anybody's way. It's just a matter of organizing it.
No, and the truth is, in Vermont, over the last handful of years, we've actually invested a ton of money, a lot of it federal money, in improving our rail infrastructure.
Right.
For a number of reasons. But these cars run on the same rail as
Excella.
and same rail as Amtrak, and,
Yep.
and our rail infrastructure is really, really good.
And
Yeah.
Amtrak does not own these rails.
No, it's some of it's private, some of it's state-owned. It's a combination, and it's
Pan Am
complicated.
Railways.
There's depends
Yeah,
where in the
depends
state
on
you
where
are.
it is, right.
But access is something that can be negotiated, and it's something we're figuring out. Now, what we're looking to do here is we're looking to show up with the hardware and try to push the state and Vermont towards re-implementing passenger rail. So to be clear, we can't do it all, and we're not going to run the service. We're not going to be the conductors or the engineers. But what we can do is produce the hardware, keep it up to speed, and work to make this happen. And so this is the crew we have working on it right now.
Let's get the crew up again.
Charlie's the gentleman in the shorts. Steve, who has the beard, has been in the rail industry for years, knows everything about rail. He also happens to be a diesel mechanic. And then we have a couple interns, Cody and Ricky, who've been on loan from Vermont Technical College, and we're getting just a huge kick out of getting to work on trains in 2018. I share the sentiment. I love telling people I'm in the railroad business. And I get to say the renewable energy industry and the railroad business, which is a lot of fun. But a little bit more about these cars. I'll show some more pictures because they're exciting. So this is sort of the transformation that's happening as we bring them to life here in Vermont. We've
You're gonna
cleaned them
paint
up.
green for the Green Mountain
Of
State,
course,
huh?
we're going to paint them green and for renewable energy. But this is a
Trinity
before and after
Railway
on one of
Express.
them.
Okay.
And
Nick,
then
do
this
you,
is-
do you happen to know what that thing on the top of the train is?
Yeah, so that's the APU engine, which provides the electricity for running the train itself, and the air conditioning is up there as well.
Aha, okay.
Because they were in Dallas, they have a slightly more aggressive air conditioning system than we'll need most days of the year
Until
in
climate
Vermont.
change gets
Right
us.
now, 10 years from now, though, we might need to improve the air conditioning.
So the actual motor to run the train's down by the wheels.
Yeah, so we'll get to that.
All right.
But absolutely, so that engine up above is for the electricity, and then the engines themselves, there's under each end, there's a diesel engine, which allows the trains to be self-powered, and also multi-directional. So there's a diesel engine that
So you don't have to turn
can pull
these
it in
things
either
around. They
direction.
just
So there's
go-
no turnarounds.
It's like a subway car.
That's what's just really exciting. It's similar in some ways, and it feels like that. This is another picture of the inside. You can see it's pretty nice looking. It certainly feels nice being inside. This is what we call a PowerPoint fail. I'm not sure. This is one of the trains in Montpelier a couple weeks ago. That's it.
There we
we are. We brought one of the trains down into Montpelier because the legislators were all in town, including the new legislators, for legislative briefing. We wanted to give them a chance to see the trains up close and really get a feel for what we're talking about.
What's
Yeah,
that white
since-
stuff on the
What
roof?
the scale is. Well, I think that might be snow this year, even though it was November. It was
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it
touch
snows.
and go with a snowstorm.
It still snows in Vermont in November sometimes.
It sure
Sometimes.
does. Let's see if we have another good
I,
picture
the
here.
the people I've talked to about this were very excited about it.
Well, what I just love about getting to show these trains to people is people don't know what to expect. They've heard a little bit about them, maybe haven't heard about them. They might be picturing a steam engine, they might be picturing
Oh my
a
gosh!
bullet train, they might be picturing something huge. And these are really, really good equipment. They feel like new, and they're at a scale that's going to work in Vermont.
And they're very substantial. This is safe equipment. This is not something that's going to get blown over by a wind easily.
No, and these have gotten run all over the world, up in Canada, in climates like Vermont, and they're doing great. It's another angle of the train. This is a picture I just wanted to include because it's a...
Two of them stuck together.
Yeah, and this is another feature. So they can run on their own, single. You can also do them up in teams of 2s, 3s, even 4s, which gives us an enormous amount of flexibility as we start thinking about what this could look like.
So you could take a
running in
train
Vermont.
from the southern part of the state and run it up to Bellows Falls and split it.
Absolutely, and if we realize that we need to have 200 people that need to move from Bellows Falls up to White River Junction at 7:30 a.m. every morning,
You could do it.
we could do that, and then we could split them up, and we could send another half of them up to Montpelier and send half of them back down to Brattleboro. And that gives us a real creativity that I think makes this project much more viable at a scale in Vermont. And that's been one of the challenges.
So
People
each
have
one of
looked at
these things
passenger rail.
is totally independent.
They're independent,
can
but
work
they
together.
can work together.
I'm curious how you got 12 of these things from Dallas to Vermont.
Well, we took them on the rails.
Yeah, of course, but were they done in
So-
groups?
No, they were moved more or less at the same time. The drive shafts were taken out.
Ah.
So they weren't self-powered. They were towed up.
They were
towed
towed
up
up.
from Dallas.
Okay.
We have had them out on their own power on the rail lines a couple of times. They're up in the trains are up in Barrie right now.
Right.
At the Bombardier plant, which used to build trains actually.
Yeah.
In Barrie. So there's a rail yard there. We're able to do short excursions within the rail
I
yard.
wonder if it would make sense to turn that plant back into a manufacturing plant to make trains.
I like the way this guy thinks.
Not much would make me happier. Northern Power is there actually building wind turbines too. So there's a interesting synergy there that just happened. This is one more picture at night. Just another gives you a sense of the scale a little bit and the excitement around the project. So this is a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what these trains look like. They seat around 94 passengers. You can get more people in there standing at rush times pretty comfortably. They are individually motorized, which means they move without locomotives, and that's what really makes them special. There's a diesel engine sitting under each end of the train. Allows them to go both directions. There's no turnarounds. You also get a much more efficient crew because
Right.
one engineer can run one of these. The fuel efficiency is actually pretty good. They are, to be clear, diesel, but they get 2+ miles a gallon.
2.8.
2.8 is is one of the figures.
When I read that, I was really struck by that figure because there have been cars around that get barely more than 3.
Yeah, and you really have to you have to take it a couple steps further in your logic. You think about, put 100 people on there. That's almost 100 cars that aren't on the road.
Right.
And you're moving them much more efficiently.
Yes.
And that's what's exciting about this. Now, to be clear, David's vision and our vision, this isn't the end goal. This isn't what we do for the next 100 years in Vermont. This is an intermediate step that we can do on the infrastructure we have right now.
Right.
And the vision is to push us towards a passenger rail system that's flourishing, that's working, and ultimately we can electrify the rail system, which hasn't happened yet, and put electric trains moving people around, which is more efficient. That's where we need to go.
Right.
We're never going to get there if we don't do something soon.
I don't know who did the estimate, but somebody estimated that it would cost $300 million to get the rail system functioning again in Vermont.
So that's been one The state has done a couple studies over the years, and one of the reasons David is doing this is because he fundamentally believes that the state got it wrong in their estimates.
Well, I think
that they're looking at the scale of equipment, just a massive amount of money just to get the equipment here.
Yeah.
Somewhere north of $100 million. We've done it for $6 million, and
That's a big difference, isn't it?
And we did it to try to force people to start moving. That we can do this.
I think this could be crowdfunded. Mm-hmm. I mean seriously, if you want to raise money for a thing like this, I don't think you've got to go to the stock market or the banks even. You could crowdfund it because I think a lot of people in Vermont would be really interested in seeing this happen.
I have never gotten to work on a project where there are so many people so excited about it from all over the place. And whether I'm talking to people in Brattleboro or up in St. Albans, Essex Junction, out in Rutland, they get it and they can think about ways that their life would be transformed for the better with access to this.
Well, not just in Vermont, but all over, probably the world, but certainly in America. The way people are looking at their automobile transportation is changing. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very different in 25 years than it is today.
Okay, if you talk to people, so I'm 32, if you talk to people my age and younger, the data consistently shows that we don't want cars. We want to be able to live in a way where we can get around, whether it's through ride sharing.
Are you a
carpooling.
millennial?
I think I'm tail end of the millennials.
The millennials aren't buying cars. That's a fact.
And as we look in Vermont, what we want to do in the next generation with our economy, with our state, we need to bring young people. We need to attract millennials. And this is a piece of it. This would give people access to job markets all over the state that they wouldn't have to commute to by car. It would give them the opportunity to, instead of being a two-car household with two commuters, they may be able to make it work with one car, maybe be able to work it with ride sharing. And it would also give them access to, if they need to get down to New York City, if they need to get down to Boston, travel for business, they can do that. And it also brings new people into the state.
Yeah.
Whether it's for a ski economy, whether it's just to visit, it allows travel in both directions in a way that's more convenient, more accessible, and more sustainable.
In order to really appreciate this, a lot of people should sit down and ask themselves carefully and do the calculations. How much does it cost to own and operate a car? Because when you compare the cost of owning and operating a car and commuting to work by rail, if you're going to do that kind of commutation, the difference is enormous. It's like you can live in a better house if you don't own a car.
It's pretty staggering. And that's an option that's not on the table right now for Vermonters. You can't work.
For most of Vermont, you can't live without a car.
You can't work in Vermont without a car. It just,
But
talk to people who've tried, you can't.
Something
really
like
can't do
this
it.
will open up Vermont for working out of
That is
your house.
absolutely the vision, and particularly for young people, new businesses, the millennial folks that we talk a lot about wanting to attract and retain. This is something we can do.
And if these things are running up and down, there's not much needed to build a station.
Yeah.
If there's a need for a station, they don't even need a roof.
What we need to do, though, is get buses going.
Yeah,
in
that's
a way that will be coordinated.
Well, that's absolutely clear to us, and
yeah.
increasingly clear as we dig into this. For this system to work, you can't look at rail in isolation. You need to look at a full multimodal, public transit system.
Right.
And you've got to be able to catch a bus when you get off of that
Yeah.
train. You've got to be able to take the bus to the train if need be. And so we're thinking very strategically about how does this work as a complementary system to the parts of our public transit system which already are working in Vermont.
In the last 20 years ago, I was living in the southwestern corner of New Hampshire, just across the river from Brattleboro, and I was working in Washington, D.C., and that's a long commute. And I would go down to Washington once a month and then come back at the end of the month for a weekend. And that was my commute. I went down by rail because it was the most convenient way to go. Mm-hmm. It was much more convenient than going by air, and it saved a lot of money. But since that time, the rail's improved. At that time, the rail infrastructure, the road beds in Vermont were not in good shape, and the trains were traveling at speeds like 20 miles an hour. And since that time, they have been upgraded enormously. But what has not been upgraded and has in fact become far worse is the buses. Mm-hmm. At that time, you could get a bus from Brattleboro to Springfield, Massachusetts, or go up the valley, and the buses went through 3 times a day. Now, they go through, once a day?
I think it's once. Yeah.
And it's really,
Greyhound, right?
really hard to get to Boston.
Yeah.
In those days, it was not too bad to get to Boston. But one of the things that I found exciting about this idea is that if you extend it a little bit, we could have trains going from Burlington to Boston.
Yeah. No, and that is absolutely the vision. We are practically trying to figure out where this service can start and how soon, and working with the state and other partners to try to put together that idea. But for this to really be a viable thing, it needs to rapidly. We need to prove the concept somewhere, and then we need to expand it to statewide.
Now, I've been telling everybody that you're planning on having this thing going sometime this summer.
All right.
Is that a good time to say?
I think that's reasonable. This is incredibly complex from a regulatory standpoint, from a financial standpoint.
Right.
This is something, frankly, that's new.
But once you've gone through those regulations and the financing and so forth, you've got the experience, you know what to do, you know who to talk to.
I think scaling it up will be rapidly possible. And this isn't envisioned as a, Burlington to Montpelier service or a Burlington to Rutland service. This is envisioned as a statewide network.
Which again is
including Brattleboro.
where the buses become important, because a person coming from White River Junction who wants to go to Bennington is going to find it difficult to crossing Vermont. Going north and south in Vermont is easy. Going east and west in Vermont is not so easy. And the buses are going to fill that in.
That's why we have to work in close coordination. The environmental context about why we're doing this is significant as well. In Vermont, the transportation sector is our leading sector. It's at least 42%.
That's because of all the individual cars.
And that's exactly it. Well, there's a couple of, but that is a huge part of it, is the individual cars. The statistics on what commuter trips look like, it's something like 82% of car trips in Vermont are single occupancy commuter travel. So it's people like me roaring up and down.
In an SUV or a pickup truck.
Well, yeah, I'm not driving one of those, but there's all these people are moving single car, single occupancy, traveling for work every day. And it is just killing us. And it is not a problem that we've been able to make any progress on whatsoever.
Well, it sounds like you might make some progress now.
Well, that is the vision, and there is some other really exciting things happening with electric vehicles and other pushes, but to really move the needle as quickly as we need to, we have to get people moving through public transit, moving together, moving more efficiently, and no amount of electrification of vehicles is going to allow us to continue behaving.
You're still going to have single occupancy cars.
But we need to make that happen much less, even if they are electric vehicles. It's just
absolutely.
What we're doing right now is not sustainable on
I
so
think
many
of
levels.
I think of when I was a kid. I went to Europe. I spent some time in Germany, and I stayed at a youth hostel outside of Heidelberg, and the youth hostel was, I don't know, you had to go a mile and a half out of the center of the town by trolley. And when I went back into town in the morning, I got on the trolley and rode into town. And every stop, which meant about every 200 yards, maybe every 100 yards, a woman would get on carrying what looked like a pizza box. And I turned to the person next to me and said, "What are all the pizza boxes?" And some of them had one, some had two, some had three. And he said, "Those are women, those are the farm wives taking their eggs to market."
I was going to say their eggs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is what was going on in Europe. And I think that if people in the United States understood how easy that makes everything, people are walking 50 yards to a trolley stand and within 15 minutes getting a ride to town. And when you compare that with the 25 minutes you're going to have to spend searching for a parking space, really it makes a difference.
I'm firmly convinced this is a service people will adopt and be excited about for all sorts of reasons. And there'll be people who want to do it because it's environmentally a better thing to do.
Yes.
But there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be doing it just because it's more convenient, it's more exciting, and it's an option that doesn't exist right now. And that, in addition to the environmental aspects, gets me really excited about this project because it gives people, a lot of low-income people, access to job markets, access to travel that they wouldn't normally have, and it fundamentally restructures the decisions that a young family like mine can make.
Absolutely.
Right now,
Absolutely.
we need
Certainly
those two
opens
cars
up
first,
a lot of possibilities.
and that's not the choices I would make if I had alternatives. Interestingly, not surprisingly, and I apologize for some formatting issues here with the PowerPoint, but the point is sound. Vermont was built around the railways, and today about 80% of Vermonters live within a mile of a rail station.
Now, these are all existing rail lines now.
These are the existing rail lines.
There's only one of them being used for passengers.
No, two. You've got Ethan Allen running in the western side of the state.
That's right. It's coming from Albany.
Yeah.
There is some passenger activity and there is some freight activity, but largely this is a resource that we've invested in. It's in very good shape, our rail lines, and it's massively underutilized. So if you live near a rail line, which you probably do, statistically speaking,
Yeah.
think about how many times trains come by a day. And these are rails that can be shared between freight, between passengers, and there is capacity.
You don't even use them much for free.
They're embarrassingly
Yeah.
underused at this point. But that is also the opportunity. And the truth is, the population centers and where people live actually match up even closer to the rail lines than they do along the highways. And that
That's
gives
an
us
interesting
opportunity.
point.
Well, if you break it down, it makes a whole lot of sense, because when Vermont was settled, it was around the railways. It was not. It was
Yeah.
not around the
Yeah,
highways.
of course.
That's
There
actually
weren't any highways.
pretty recent development here.
Yeah.
The highways basically followed the railroads.
The other thing that's really exciting about this, and this also makes a great deal of logical sense, when you put a train station that's operating commuter passenger rail service in a downtown community, you see a massive economic development, because it's bringing people into town. It's creating a need. So whether it's coffee shops, restaurants, other things spring up around a thriving community passenger rail station. It's something we saw in Dallas, where these trains used to live before they were outgrown. So Dallas, it was such a successful service that they had to upgrade, and they moved to bigger trains.
Just like they
That's
did in
when
New
these
Jersey.
came up to, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a story we've seen all over the place. Their studies showed for every dollar of public funds invested in the infrastructure, it ultimately returned $7 in private investment. And U.S. Department of Commerce studies show that for every dollar invested in railroads, passenger rail, you supported about $10 in local economic activity. And that's really exciting when you think about where some of these passenger rail stations could be in the communities. You know, think about Bellows Falls, if bringing people into town, the ability to help revitalize that downtown. It's an exciting prospect. White River Junction, Brattleboro, all these
White
communities.
River what?
White River Junction.
Junction.
That might have been a rail town. There might be a connection there as well. Or I think about going north from Montpelier. Middlesex would be the next stop. That's where the Red Hen Bakery is, right there. There's a little community cluster, but the opportunity to really expand that and put some more viable businesses there and develop a thriving community. There's also opportunity to do housing, because all of a sudden people want to live near a rail station, right? So people will invest in moderate and low-income housing, and there'll be a market for it, because instead of having to buy a car, you can live near the rail station.
Makes
You
sense
know-
to
Walk
me.
downtown, and you can hop on the train.
You know, Nick, I just had a thought as you were talking.
Well,
Beginner's luck.
Yeah, it probably is. These cars they're passenger cars, which means that they're fairly light as rail cars go. And they don't have locomotives, which means that they're fairly light. And that means, in turn, that the stopping distance of these cars is going to be fairly short compared to...
you got lucky. You got that one right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and that
And-
gives them more flexibility. So the accelerating speed is also
Right.
faster because of that. So they're not considered light rail. They are, which would.
But it
different
means
infrastructure.
that if you had a demand for a place, you could have a rail station put up at a relatively low cost without interfering with the scheduling, because you could bring that car and stop it and get it going relatively quickly.
That's exactly right, and that's one of the additional flexibility pieces with these pieces of hardware, these BUD cars or rail diesel cars. The stopping and starting distance is much smaller than, say, an Amtrak train. And so if it makes sense to put 2 stops in Brattleboro,
You could do it.
you could do it. It wouldn't mess with the scheduling. And it also gives you the flexibility to have some stations that are more built up, more, what you picture as a rail station, and maybe some smaller platforms that are just, a covered platform.
Basically, we don't even have a covered platform here in Brattleboro.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, living in Winchester, New Hampshire, I can remember using the station in West Northfield. There's no station in West Northfield anymore, but in those days it was a flag stop,
Yeah.
Okay, and it was a station.
and it was a station. Yeah, you could buy a ticket to it.
The reality is we did a pretty damn good job of figuring this out a while ago.
Yeah, 150 years ago.
And we don't have to reinvent all the pieces of it. There's an enormous amount there's a wealth of knowledge and best practices and things that we can start doing again. And with so many things in the renewable world, it's new technology, it's new practices, it's innovative stuff. This isn't that, but we kind of got it right.
But like a lot of things in the renewable world, going there is going to be cheaper, it's going to be more convenient, it's going to be more comfortable, it's going to create jobs, it's going to be economically not just feasible but advantageous. Yeah. It's going to be healthier.
Well, it's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win-win-win.
6, 7, 8 time win.
Absolutely, and the only time you get to the loss is when you get to Wichita.
This is actually another shot I wanted to include.
Oh, that's lovely.
It helps give a scale. This is actually when you mentioned how they come into town. This is when they first arrived. So that's them passing through.
That's very neat.
Well, that's a nice long train, isn't it?
Yeah. So this isn't probably what you'd see in practice. You'd probably see couples of 2, 3s, maybe 4s.
Where is that?
I was trying to look. It may be
Chester?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's definitely Vermont, though.
Looks like Vermont. Yeah.
Looks about every Vermont town I've been.
Somewhere between here and Barrie, I would guess.
So I'm biased. I live up in Sharon, Vermont, right near the law school in South Royalton, and the train goes right by my house. I could probably hit it with a baseball on a good day. I could hit the tracks. And I spend a lot of time traveling around the state for the work I do. And the idea of being able to hop in a train at the law school, do some work, talk to some law students, talk to some other folks I'd met before, it just hits me on a social level, it hits me on a practical level, and would just fundamentally transform the way my life and professional work is. And it would cut down massively on my personal carbon impact. So I am very determined to figure out a way to make this work and get it going past Vermont as well.
We haven't really got into the environmental and health aspects of this. I hope we have time to get to that.
Let's, no time like the present.
Well, let's do it.
Oh, we saw this one already.
So this is
Did we?
This is what we're trying to do. Is do this in a way that's cost effective, reliable, safe, but also puts the planet first and reduces.
Well, if you build
emissions.
it, they will come.
That is our hope.
Yeah,
And,
I think it's true.
it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another thing that, I don't think you're going to have this in your slideshow, but I think people should be aware of it, and that is, the figure I had seen was 48% of our emissions, fossil fuel emissions, came from transportation, which is pretty close to 42 that you had mentioned. But those emissions, according to the American Lung Association in California, cost us $330 million a year.
Uh-huh.
That's just from transportation. That is health costs of transportation-related emissions in Vermont. And if we can get from where we are to a place where our transportation doesn't have those emissions, we're going to save that money, which would be like a bonus of $480 per person per year.
These are all second-order consequences, and people act as if they don't exist. But
Well, they're told they don't.
Real.
They're told to act that they don't exist by people who profit from them. And the people who
the
profit.
bottom line is you're paying for these things whether you don't like it or not.
It comes out of your insurance. It comes out of your taxes. It comes out of your pocket if you happen to be the person with emphysema.
Yeah.
Or asthma.
And whether the number is 42, 43, 48% of our emissions in Vermont, it's not irrelevant, but it's rising, right? It's going in the wrong direction.
It's going in the wrong direction.
We're not catching this part of the slope. It is going up, and will continue to do so.
Well, it's great if you get somebody else to pay for your problems.
And there are people in Wichita who are expert at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not that
you
I
wouldn't
have
happen
any,
to know any names, would you?
Yeah, but I don't have anything against Wichita in particular. So it's just that's the name I come up with.
The truth is we've made some progress on our electricity in Vermont. We have an enormous amount of progress left we need to achieve. We import most of our electricity, which a lot of people don't realize. It's not necessarily renewable. But that's a sector that we're starting to figure out how to improve. Thermal's the other sector that we're figuring some things out. Cold climate heat pumps, biomass, other approaches. Transportation's a really, really hard one
Oh, it is.
to figure out.
And it's very important.
And it's mostly an unregulated sector as well. And so there's less levers that we have from a policy standpoint. What's really exciting to me about this project is it's something we can do now to start pushing people, pushing us as a society to transform the way we're moving around. And we need to do that. It's killing us. Transportation is hurting us all over the country. Vermont, it's particularly acute.
It is literally killing us.
And it is quite literally killing us.
Something like another Vermonter almost every day dies because of polluted air. And you know, people in Vermont think of Vermont as having clean air, and in fact, that's not what the scientists are telling us. They're telling us actually that places like Wyoming, where they've got all those coal-burning power plants, have got cleaner air than Vermont. And this is understandable when you consider that the air that we breathe, where does it come from? Well, it comes from New York, and it comes from Pennsylvania, and it comes from Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and Quebec. We are getting the things that other people burn, and but the transportation that we've got in Vermont is one of the biggest issues. And what you're talking about is stepping in the direction of addressing that.
Well, it's exciting to work on for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is trains are exciting, and there's a romanticism and a legacy and an American whole rich history with trains. There's a lot of really good train songs. There's lots to like about trains. I love it. But what is really, really exciting to me is this is something we can do now to start moving in the other direction as far as what we're doing with transportation. Something that is quite literally killing us here in Vermont. So the takeaway is that they're here, they're ready to roll, and it's something that we can do now as a state. These are practical, safe, and they're ready to go. So if any of your viewers or the audience are excited about this as well, I'd encourage you to please visit AllEarthRail.com. You can see a little bit more about what we're up to, and you can sign up for updates. And then I would encourage you to start talking about this with your friends and family, people you talk to, and also your legislators and local officials.
Yeah, I've already started doing that. And the legislators that I've talked to have been excited about it already.
I think there's some real palpable excitement going into this legislative session.
Yes.
There's a lot of education that falls on us. This is a project that people are just starting to learn about. And we've been getting out the word out in a couple of different ways, including this discussion today.
Yeah.
But in the coming months, I'm really going to be talking with legislators, lawmakers, other decision makers, making sure they really understand the potential of this project, why we're doing it from an environmental context, and the many, many benefits to Vermonters around the state if we can pull this together.
One thing I would suggest to anybody is that they try a train.
Yeah.
Because it is so comfortable to ride in a train compared to any other transportation system I know of.
That's very true.
It's just amazing. I mean, if you're going to ride in a car, you're going to be in a confined space. You're not going to be able to stand up. If you're driving the car, you have to have your attention on the road.
Yeah.
If you're in a plane, you're going to have to go through all the check-in, check-out, all of that.
Yeah,
and in
seats
addition,
are getting smaller every time. Every
and
year.
in a bus is nothing like a train, really. I mean, yes, you can get up and you can walk to the John, but the sense of confinement that you have in a bus is really very powerful compared to a train, where you have a feeling of kind of broad open spaces inside these things by comparison, even if a train is fully occupied.
Yeah, no, and these are very comfortable.
They're very comfortable.
And a couple other pieces that should mention in this context, we are going to have Wi-Fi on the trains. That's something that we're working to figure out. That's something that's important to a lot of people for a lot of important reasons.
But that's been figured out by trains already.
That's not one of the tough ones here.
Yeah.
There'll be bike racks on them is the plan, so it'll allow people who who want to bike to the rail station or bike afterwards, that's an option. And we're also, they were ADA compliant in Dallas. We're figuring out that to make sure that the trains will be accessible for all populations, and then also the stations and the platforms and things like that are working, so there's no barriers to access for any Vermonters who want to use this service.
This is very exciting, Nick.
I appreciate you letting me talk about it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking about something like this ever since I moved to Brattleboro. You know, so wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a nice rail system here?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about it in a way that it could really happen, and I would really look forward to seeing it.
I've actually been thinking about this as well. Exactly the same kind of thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah. You know, going to Boston from time to time, back in the days when I had a car, I always regretted the fact that there wasn't a good rail connection to go there, and the bus system wasn't all that good either. So, and now it's worse. So, you know, we're in a situation where if we could have these things going to Boston, that would be beautiful. But
even if you had to make a connection.
Even if you had to make a connection, which would not be that difficult, because, you know, you could go to Springfield and make the connection there. And another thing that people don't realize is how fast these things can go. They're not pokey. I remember riding through, and I know that the roadbeds in Vermont are not as good as the ones in New Jersey for high speed, but I remember going down to Washington when I was commuting down there. The conductor was walking by, and I said, "Excuse me, how fast are we going?" He said, "Oh, I don't know, we're going a pretty good clip, I guess." And I said, we've got to be going at least 100 miles an hour. And he said, "Why do you say that?" And I said, "Because that's an interstate highway over there, and we're passing those cars like they're standing still." People don't realize how fast this can be. And even in Vermont, which is not as built up, it can be a very fast way to move from one place to another. And I would expect that if your schedule is built around the rail schedule, which is not that difficult to do when you've got good railroads, you'd find that getting from here to Burlington would be faster by rail than it would be by car.
Yeah, no, I think we can beat it. These cars will go about 85 miles per hour officially. I think they actually can go a little faster than that. In Vermont, Amtrak goes 59, which is probably what we would be capped out at with this service. But the routes are a little more direct, and there's zero congestion on the rails. And so we think we'll be able to offer a service that's comparable to driving, in some places faster.
Yep, and certainly faster when you consider the difficulty of finding a place to park.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Of course, this system would make it easier to find a place to park too.
Well, that's the hope, right? Is that there'd be a whole bunch more parking spaces because people wouldn't be driving their cars downtown.
Yeah.
And would be making different choices about how they move themselves around the state.
Well, we've got to do something because we can't live the way that we are. And
no, and this is a moment. This is an opportunity for us as a state to take this action. And passenger rail in Vermont has been talked about for a very long time.
Years.
It's been tried, and there's pieces that we've learned from that. But what is different is the hardware is here. That has been one of the big barriers, and certainly the recent studies. That's been the number that people just.
David Blittersdorf has a tendency to do things.
He certainly is a doer, and he likes to push people along, which at times can lead to some tension and some frustrations. But if you also look back on the work he's been involved in, a lot of the stuff that he was saying 20 years ago that seemed kind of crazy to people is pretty commonplace right now. And with global warming and climate change and our emissions crisis, this has been his life's work, and he is determined to move the needle. And this project is coming from that place. He cares deeply about Vermont, lifelong Vermonter, and he cares deeply about our climate and what is happening. And he's put his money where his mouth is. And it's a substantial investment.
It's a lot different from thinking about it, like I have and George has for a long time, to somebody saying, "Here, I got a dozen of these things, guys. Let's go. Let's roll."
That's what got me excited about working for him. I read about it when they rolled into town. I was like, I gotta find a way to work for this guy.
This is a different approach, you know.
How long?
Let's do this. Let's do this. No, here's my trains.
How
They're
long-
here already. I want to use them.
How long have you been working for David?
I've known David for longer. I've been working for him directly for about a year now. I'm
I
working
see.
for him full time with a focus on this project for about 7 months. So,
And when did the trains arrive?
about a year and a half ago.
So he already had them when you started working. For him.
Yeah, no, it got my attention, but he had a series of conversations with decision makers and policy people, and the refrain he kept hearing: "We're never going to do passenger rail in Vermont until someone shows up with
Yes,
equipment."
but one of the things that I find kind of exciting is that I'm seeing people who are very interested in addressing our environmental issues and our energy issues are being elected to the legislature. And
It's the most exciting group of new legislators.
we've got some amazing
I've gotten
people.
to see, paying very close attention to Vermont politics for about a decade now and being
Yes.
involved in various capacities. This is something new. This class of new folks, there's like about 40 of them, which is a huge chunk of the legislature.
Yeah.
They're formed, they're passionate, and a bunch of them are driven explicitly by renewable and climate issues.
Well, we had a very interesting forum in here last Monday, and Becca Balint was involved in
Yeah.
that, and Emily
Emily Kornheiser.
Kornheiser was involved in it, and Molly Burke also,
Uh-huh.
but and Jeanette White. But I was surprised, delighted actually, at how well informed Emily was.
She's a real...
She's
She's a go-getter.
a go-getter. She's an impressive
I
young
don't know
woman.
if Montpelier is ready. But
Well,
a healthy thing.
Montpelier survived Becca Balint,
Yeah.
so it can probably survive Emily.
That is true.
And Becca, I was walking out of the co-op here one day, and she had just set up a stand because she was getting signatures for the next senatorial run, and I walked up to her and said, "Becca, I'm really disappointed that you're running for Senate." And she looked kind of crestfallen. And I said, "I wanted you to run for governor."
It's coming, guy.
Well,
It could.
Yeah.
Could happen.
It could happen, but we've got very competent.
There's some really exciting other
Smart.
new freshman legislators from around the state. There's a couple from up in my neck of the woods in White River Junction. The new state rep, her name is Becca White. She works for a solar company. She's on the select board. She's one of the sharpest people I've met, and she's in her early 20s.
Oh my gosh.
And she's going to be there.
Well,
There's a couple other people who are in the renewable energy sector who will be bringing that knowledge and understanding of what this work is like on the ground into the legislature, which I think is just so exciting.
if you don't mind, I want to tell you who I favor for president of the United States.
I couldn't stop you if I wanted to.
As a guy who voted for Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and so forth, Tulsi Gabbard.
Uh-huh.
Do you know Tulsi Gabbard?
Do. What's the rationale?
I just think she's marvelous. I think she's, she reminds me a lot of the people that we're talking about in Vermont who have got this intelligence, drive, knowledge, experience. Another way of looking at things, which we need right now. We don't need to, we need a new, as a business, as a country, as a state, we need a new business plan, because the business plan that we've got is antiquated. Right now, we've got a government which wants us to go back to our greatness when the Remington typewriter was the way everybody communicated on paper, and the days when we had slide rules and those were our computers. And do you even know what a slide rule is? You're 31 years old. We have.
Ever use one?
It's kind of like an abacus, right?
Well, not very much like an abacus. I love slide rules. I've got about 60 of them, but they're not computers, and we live in a different age, and trying to get America to be great again based on coal technology is not going to make it in the world that we live in, and we need a new business plan, and we need people with courage to do that. And it's nice to know that David Blittersdorf, who's got gray hair and is not as young as you, has the courage to be able to do that.
Well, I will make sure to pass that along.
Good enough. What's your time on the thing there?
We got about 5 more minutes.
Do we? Okay.
I mean, the other thing I was going to say, and we touched on it earlier, this new group of legislators and what's happening nationally, I have noticed, particularly over the last couple of weeks, in the talk of the new Green Deal, I feel like there's some momentum and there's a wave of just these issues are coming at us, and they're so real. This isn't climate change isn't something that's going to happen. It's not my kids that are going to be impacted by it. They will. It's happening. It's happening right now.
We are impacted by it now.
Much, much faster.
The peach tree is growing in the corner of the property.
I mean, there it is. That's,
there it is. I love peaches. I think they're great. I actually planted a peach tree, and then my landlady said, that's the same tree as the one we've got over there.
That's just remarkable.
But pawpaws, and
What's a pawpaw?
A pawpaw is a fruit that's extremely sweet, full of seeds, and looks like a potato.
Okay.
Have you ever had one?
I don't think so.
They taste a little bit like a banana, pineapple, that kind of group.
And they didn't used to grow here.
And they didn't used to grow here, but they do now.
Yeah.
And the minimum temperature in the coldest night of the winter, which is the thing that tells you what the hardiness zone we're in, I think has probably gone up over 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And that means that in Brattleboro, I think we're in an entirely different zone than we used to be. Actually, I calculate that we're probably in zone 6, which is where, central to southern Connecticut used to be. And part of that, because we're in a microclimate that's a town, urban, island microclimate. But, we've got our next door neighbor planted somewhat unsuccessfully a fig tree. The fig tree is surviving, but it's not bearing fruit. We have, at my house, we have fig trees and citrus trees and so forth, which are brought in for the winter. And, the calamandan that we have is extremely productive. Calamandan fruit are too tart for a lot of people, but they make marvelous marmalade, and you can make drinks out of them that are like lemonade. You could use a calamandan where you would use a lemon. They're extremely productive. This little tree that's 4 feet tall has got 200 fruit on it.
Never mind.
And these things
are about the size of kumquats, aren't they?
They're a little bigger than a kumquat. They're about they're a little bit bigger. But the climate is changing. Some of it's for the better. Most of it, the overwhelming bulk of it, is for the worse.
It's very grim.
It's grim.
And it's here.
And it's here.
And we need to start doing things differently, or there's not
going
to be things left to do.
Why is this show going? Because I'd like my grandchildren to live in a comfortable environment. That's the bottom line.
Well, I really appreciate you having me here today to talk about all of this, and the overlying message here is the reason we are doing this is because transportation is killing us. And we can do something. I want to tell you, Nick, this is something that could be done anywhere in the United States. Well, that is, Vermont has a legacy of doing things first that have had an outsized impact. Right. We've led on a lot of important progressive issues. Right. In my lifetime and earlier. For Vermont, though. And this is time. We can do this one next. Well, Tom and I very often say we're not financial advisors. We have to tell you this right up front. Yeah. But I'm going to give people financial advice here. If you happen to be looking for a company to start, think about building rail cars. We'll make some calls. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Have a nice, and we'll see all the. Oh my goodness gracious, Tom. Let's get us all up. Closing slide. Let's get us all up. There you go. So come back next time, and we'll hope to see. We'll keep you up to date on this.